this state to extend the state of public emergency from the 26th of March for 90 days. We gave them 45 days. In those 45 days, the state has the power to make regulations, but we are informed that the regulations must be affirmed by this National Assembly. We are empowered to extend, and the state under Section 34(3) has authority to revoke what it has proclaimed. And this National Assembly also has power to revoke any resolution we pass. Here you have the separation of powers, having responsibility to guard the interests of the people. We are discussing about the Gambian people and their interests, how to safeguard it. That is the focus. That is why the state came with regulations. 4 of them when we sat in April, and an additional one after our sitting. When we gave the 45 days, we also passed a motion to set up a committee, a special select committee, that will have some of the following functions: ensure the implementation by the executive of the state of public emergency within the remits of the law. Ensure that government provides the necessary mechanism for the implementation of the regulations. Of course, maybe we exceeded the bounds of what is reasonable under those circumstances, because that is what we cannot ensure. Maybe we would have chosen other phrases to be able to describe what we could do. But essentially, what we intended to do is to create a committee that will serve as oversight and be able to follow up the process of implementation and report back to us after receiving the facts. In essence, we created a fact-finding mission that would be able to advise the National Assembly if there is need for the revocation or further extension of the state of emergency, or for its extension. So essentially, we are given a report by the committee. We are told that the regulations were designed to combat the illness and defeat it. To do so, we need tools. And 3 fundamental tools are required. You need instruments. Those are the regulations. You need institutions. We'll see what the committee say about them. And you need normative practices that will lead to the change of mindsets so that we are able to serve the people by guiding them collectively towards what is essentially our common destiny being safeguarded. Honorable Speaker, if we look at the regulations, we will see that the committee was assigned the responsibility to accompany the executive in ensuring that these regulations are implemented. These regulations are required by the Constitution to be reasonable and justifiable. So that is one assessment that would have to be done to gauge whether these regulations are fit for purpose. The Essential Commodities Regulation Powers was designed to carry out or to ensure that we preserve essential commodities being available: rice, maize, millet, flour, sugar, milk, bread, chicken, and on and on. All these are supposed to be available to ensure that they are here. They are essential. We need them. They should be available. And to ensure that they are available at reasonable prices, it also creates an element of price control. And to prevent price control being abused, it bars hoarding of the goods. It ensures that even rationing could be implemented to prevent one person buying bulk and making others to lose. So the regulation prohibited export so that the goods will be available. And to create an institution that will ensure implementation, it creates the Essential Commodities Control Committee. And that committee is supposed to supervise the enforcement of the regulation. So it creates a committee. The Solicitor General is part of the committee, Director General State Intelligence part of the committee, Inspector General of Police, the Commissioner General, Gambia Revenue Authority, the Chief Executive Officer, Gambia Chamber of Commerce, the Executive Secretary, Gambia Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, the President, Consumer Protection Consortium of the Gambia. So essentially, these are people who should monitor this regulation on a day-to-day basis so that it will be implemented as stipulated. So one would expect then that our committee will be able to meet this particular committee to find out what the challenges were and how they sought to address them. I have not seen that in the report. Honorable Speaker, I have also with me an Essential Commodities Emergency Powers Amendment Regulation 2020. And it was designed to amend what is already available. Somehow, page 1, we've seen it mentioned about the open markets and also the driver of commercial vehicles, because we've heard that people were exporting and now they are required to report their whereabouts when they are carrying out these goods from the Greater Banjul area. And they must not depart after 3 p.m., etc. So they must report to the police indicating their destination, etc. So in short, the objective is to prevent the exportation of these goods. But the Attorney General in his reply may have to observe page 2, where it says that may this day of 2020, no date. And there I must emphasize again, Honorable Speaker, that we are supplied these documents, but we should really start getting these documents directly from the government printers, because they are the printers. And as an interested person, we've tried getting this regulation before Parliament was convened, and we had to pay $230 for each copy. And this is just about 4 pages or something. That's clearly, I will not use the language, that will not be parliamentary, but 4 pages for $230 is exorbitant. and the Attorney General must begin to monitor what happens at the printers, whether they are in fact available. The confusion may not be between the two institutions that we are talking about, as we see, but sometimes at the source. We've been privileged to seek the documents at the source, and at a material time, we were not able to get it. So therefore, we must ensure that these gazettes at proper sources must be available. And we will ultimately recommend that all government institutions become subscribers to the gazette so that they get direct copies once they are printed. That's the way to solve these problems, because some of our institutions are actually working towards that direction. But here then, Honorable Speaker, there are impacts. When you say we should not export, there are impacts to that, because Gambia has always been benefiting from exportation for its economy. And that is why the impact assessment is important. That this committee that is established is not only securing that essential commodities are available, but what is the impact of not exporting in the economy when we rely basically on the export trade for importation of quite a lot of goods and therefore for access to revenue. Honorable Speaker, number 2, there is the closure and restriction of non-essential public places emergency powers regulation. This regulation seeks to close bars, gymnasiums, museums, nightclubs, etc., etc., etc. It also goes to restrict booze to 5 people, maintaining social distancing. It restricts public gathering in restaurants, so that the restaurants, at least you buy takeaway and maintain social distancing. It restricts public gathering in supermarkets so that there'll be social distancing. Saloons and barbershops, and essentially that is the objective. Now, we must look at this as a crime if you violate these laws, and therefore essentially is the police that would be responsible as law enforcement officers, but specifically no guidance is given. And what should the police do? If they are not trained on the regulation, how will they enforce it? Is it a special squad that will be created to actually deal with the regulations? Well, essentially, if enforcement is a problem, then there is some element that we need to inject, that is the institutions that we can rely on to be able to handle the problem. There is the third one, restrictions on public transportation emergency powers regulation. This was designed to ensure that social distancing is maintained, what I call safe spacing, maintained in the transports, and they should not carry more than half of what they are licensed to carry, and ensure that if it is a vehicle with 4 passengers, that it carries only 3. It goes on motorbicycles, you only go alone, or unless emergency, medical issues, you can carry a second person. And it goes further, the freezing of commercial vehicles fares so that they will not increase again. And it creates a machinery that the public garages and stations and transport offices, that the local government authorities of every region shall ensure that the public garages and car parks are cleansed and disinfected at least twice a day, and have hand washing facilities available in all the areas, in those areas. So we are beginning to see responsibilities. At the ferries, the canoes, they travel between 6 and 7 p.m., maximum half, essentially also protective gears being available. They must ensure that they disinfect before every trip. Well, these are all responsibilities to be carried. And the councils are given responsibility to ensure disinfecting those garages. Air transport, similarly, that where they come into the country, they must have permit before arrival. They must, if it is a medical cargo, they must be quarantined before departure. The airport and health authorities must be provided with hand sanitizers, hand washing, and protective materials. They must check their temperature, etc., etc., etc. People who arrive similarly must be checked and eventually quarantined if necessary. Well, these are all responsibilities to be carried. There is an amendment to this regulation, but the amendment basically is on the fares, increasing it. Maybe they will explain to us whether that is where the freezing is, that maybe they reduced it before. What has really happened is here is an increment. That's what the amendment is all about. Honorable Speaker, we looked at the next one is the restriction of open markets and shopping areas, emergency powers regulation. So initially, this was meant for markets to open between 6 and 2 p.m. and then after opening, they must maintain social distancing, public hygiene, and that it will be the responsibility of the councils to disinfect the markets after closure. And they were meant for those who will sell food, and others were excluded. And within 100 meters, people cannot sell within the 100 meters, but outside of that radius, they will be able to sell by maintaining social distancing. Now, it says that inspectors, the local government authorities, and the state security service shall designate their officers as inspectors to enforce these regulations. So here too, there is an element of amendment where now one group, 6 to 1 p.m., and those who are selling non-food items will now be there 2 to 6 p.m. Now the issue is, when do you disinfect? When do you sanitize? And all those issues are left untreated. Now, what is the objective? Is what we should look at. And I'll come to that very soon. The last one, Honorable Speaker, came after our last session. That is closure of educational institutions and places of worship, Emergency Powers Regulation 2020. That did not exist before. That's why we said that there was no regulation closing mosques. But now they brought one, and looking at, again, it's not even page, there's no paging, but there is no date to it. And maybe the Attorney General will help us later to understand what is really happening in this respect. So, but what is before us is closure of educational institutions and places of worship. And what is interesting, Honorable Speaker, is that it says that notwithstanding Regulation 2, which closes, an educational institution may be open for official use by its administrative staff. A mosque or a church may be open for the sole purpose of the call to prayer or a religious announcement of any other form. Does this make sense? Why say you are closing something when in reality you are saying for a particular purpose it will be open? What is the use of using the word closure except to create confusion and misunderstanding? You do not close such institutions. You can regulate. These are easy matters to handle if we do so in good faith. Clear explanation of the illness In fact, the religious leaders were the first to jump in explaining why preserving life is so fundamental to religion. So simply meeting them and discussing that, maybe the mosque committee, taking into consideration the importance of social, maybe the mosque committee, when it's called for prayer, will go there and call for prayer, and the mosque committee can pray. So that you will not say that the mosque is closed, so that you will not say the church is closed. The key, the clergy, can handle that responsibility. They become the custodian of their mosque, custodian of their churches, and explain to their own people why this pandemic needs to be fought. What is so difficult? And we raised this, Honorable Speaker, when we had this session, that be imaginative, be creative, because the objective is to get the people to take ownership. If they don't take ownership, you will not succeed. And they don't want to die. But there's so much confusion that they have no direction. So therefore, what we put as law must not be something that is so disgusting to a person that the person will feel. When you say, I've closed a mosque, what does that mean to the person? You will say that this is a draconian legislation. So what is important, Honorable Speaker, this must go. Nothing about closure mentioned when it comes to such institution. It should be regulation, some restriction that is reasonable. And then to explain what form of restriction, as has been said, you discuss with those who are the custodians so that you reach an understanding why that is being done. Honorable Speaker, the regulation constitutes the instruments that our committee should have really focused on to monitor how they are being implemented, the challenges of their implementation. If there are institutional gaps, the institution that should be created to do so. If there are financial gaps, the finances that were required. If there are material gaps, the material, because you need human resources, financial resources, material resources to be able to deal with any pandemic. So, Honorable Speaker, the committee has done its best, and our duty is to add value to the work we have started. The work we have started is to realize that it's not only the executive that has the responsibility of saving lives, but this National Assembly has the obligation to save lives. And we are competing with each other. And we should show that we are firmer, in fact, in our principles and in our objectives in ensuring that the lives of our people are not compromised. And that was the purpose of setting up such a committee to monitor the implementation of the regulations. Honorable Speaker, the committee has done the work of meeting ministries, meeting some organizations like the Gambia Chamber of Commerce, the Hotel Association, visiting markets, garages, border points, with the objective of collecting facts. If we look at the facts, we will see that it informs us of what the gaps are. And I will want to deal with those gaps so that we'll go to the recommendations. Honorable Speaker, the key institution in fighting COVID-19 is the Minister of Health. At page 9, the committee explains the core institution that has been established to lead the fight, and that is the National Public Health Emergency Committee. The committee has identified that it has earmarked certain responsibilities to be carried out. And to do so, It emphasizes that they have created a special project account, and that is open at the central bank. How much is in that account? What money is in that account? Well, our committee needs to provide us so that we understand what this account is out to do and whether it has the financial wherewithal to be able to carry it out. But what they have identified as a source of finance is 500 million earmarked by the government. And this is supposed to go to the Ministry of Health, but they also emphasize that it will not only cover health issues, it also may cover certain other matters. So they have indicated that the GCCI has provided 20 million, and they're supposed to build a 600 patient or 600 bed, I guess. If they say accommodate 600 patients, which means a 600 bed hospital in Sukuta. But the project does not come from funds raised by the ministry. So it means that this 20 million is just from the GCCI. When is this project going to be completed? When will the beds be available? That is really the question, because we're dealing with an emergency. And from them, the statistics are already quoted. I don't need to go back into that. We know that we are faced with a crisis situation. Can you imagine 181,000 people being infected, and they all live in a family setting? Who is left in the Gambia? All of us will be infected. So the more, I believe people have heard that one worker infected 500 people in Ghana by working in a particular company. So it means that one person can infect 500 people. So this can spread like wildfire. And therefore, it is important that we take that into consideration, and they have highlighted the dangers. If we ignore it, we do so at our own peril. The dangers are clearly highlighted by those who are specialists. They are our medical practitioners. If you are ill, you go to them. If you are ill, you go to them. What authority do you have to question their judgment? We have no authority, no moral authority, no legal authority to question their judgment. We can only assess their actions based on results. So, Honorable Speaker, they have told us the institution that is important in that sense, and one would wonder at page 31, they continue to highlight the health dimension in the fight against COVID-19. Speaking to the Minister of Health, they have seen the issues of equipment that are necessary. According to them, they have all the thermometers, 500, and they have others that they have ordered. In a way, they are justifying that they have the equipment necessary. So it is for them to indicate what they need. And when we look at the results, the impact assessment, well, we'll see whether the equipments that they have are serving the purpose for which they intend. The issue of their staff not being properly remunerated is clearly addressed at page 32. They are saying they give them 500, or there's 300, or there's 200. Are they satisfied with that? What queries, and this is a day, what queries do they have? We need to know. We need to deal with the staff to be able to gather the information that is necessary. So in the area of health, we've seen a machinery created, an institution, but is that institution adequate? And I hope they will come and educate us. They are the one who told us, Honorable Speaker, that the illness by being exogenous, had to be controlled from the borders. And that the first stage is screening. And they told us that mass testing, that is important. Honorable Speaker, they are the ones who also told us that once they discover certain symptoms, you must be quarantined. You must be taken to a place and kept there. We have seen the amount of money that is now being paid in the addendum to the hotels. That I don't need to go into that. We all have the document. You can see that they are being quarantined in hotels. And millions are being paid to maintain them. Catering has to be done. Millions are being paid for catering. Is that sustainable? So, don't you see the need that we must move toward the preventive dimension? Because if we move further and further into quarantining, the more expenditure, and at the end of the day, that is not sustainable. So it is important, therefore, we look at that. Their own line of thinking is that you move from screening and actually observatory to take you to quarantine you so that they can observe you. If they discover, then they treat you. Now, the treatment centers, we have seen MRC telling us that they have 42 beds so that I can speed up the process. And that in Keneba, I believe they have 10. And another place is like MRC is preparing itself for those number of beds. But what do we have? Sukuta? And which other quarantine center, which other treatment center? I don't want to mention. These are the things that we need to have. And the places where people are being treated, their location. I don't want to get into that substance. I'm sure we should be able to get into that. What facility have we provided from the Ministry of Health to be able to do the treatment, the actual curing of the person? That is very significant. So, to conclude the health sector, Honorable Speaker, we had talked about an interministerial task force because you are talking about finance, you're talking about environment, you're talking about the border, etc. All these people must constantly, not only at the level of a task force of officers under a WHO and a minister, but maybe it exists. We need to get that information so that they'll be able to sit down and look at these issues. Before regulations, they will be able to consult. Then we will not come and one institution say, I don't even know about the regulation. Who consulted who? And how can there be that without that proper consultation at that high level? So that is fundamental in our recommendation. If it does not exist, it should exist. Because the right hand must know what the left hand is doing. Otherwise, you cannot have complementarity in action. Honorable Speaker, they have looked at institutions like trade. The committee wanted to know whether essential goods would not fall short of our needs. And we have seen the ministry talking about 37,000 tons, eventually dropping to 23,000 tons. I'm now quoting statistics of head because I don't want to go ahead and continue looking. So if I have any error in that, you can rectify it. But essentially that huge drop, and they could only attribute it that some exportation was taking place. So it is important then to look at who the importers are, because you control the stock. And how will your stock miss? So it is essential to be able to have regulation in being able to deal with those stocks to ensure that that exportation does not take place in the first place. Honorable Speaker, it has also indicated the need to look at locally what is available. Have they actually examined whether there are stocks of rice in the country that people have produced, stocks of goods in the country that people have produced, that there is need for internal assessment of what is available locally, and if need be, purchase those ones in the localities before we start importing and say we are distributing. Some people may have stock of this food at the local level, which we can purchase at the local level. So it is important then that an impact assessment is done at that particular level also. Honorable Speaker, there is the Ministry of Tourism indicating the drop anticipated in the tourist industry. And the losses that are anticipated, 6.7 billion, that's not an ordinary sum, which is going to affect the hotels, the restaurants, the lodges. Is going to affect every sector of the tourism. They're talking about 100,000 young people being laid off work. 100,000 young people being laid off work. So this is not an ordinary problem. Honorable Speaker, we look at the issue of works and communication. We see the incoming flights, that all these public enterprises, GIA, etc., will be grossly affected by the current situation. The Hajj flight will be suspended. They're talking about over 200 million. So essentially, we're talking about an impact assessment of millions that are going to be lost. And Honorable Speaker, I will beg to ask the committee chair to tell me why he would put the state-owned enterprises in that whole bag of providing funds of relief for the state. It seems like quite a number of them are going to suffer tremendous losses because of the current situation, where there's ferries, etc. So we would want, ultimately, in their recommendation, to activate certain committees to look into this, to zero into this, so that proper impact assessment can be done, the threats properly seen, for the government to prepare itself. You've seen the Minister of Finance, I'll come to them, indicating that the 35 million that had been given in terms of dealing with the state-owned enterprises, at least is being converted in some way to be able to deal with COVID-19. So these are issues that we need to look at concretely in terms of the short, medium, and long-term impact on the economy and on those institutions and their survival. Honorable Speaker, we have looked at their findings at the borders, at the markets, etc. What I have not seen, Honorable Speaker, is talking to the market committees, talking to the unions. I've seen the Gambia Chamber of Commerce. I don't want to accuse the committee of being business bias and not workers focus, but I see absence in that really the unions, where there's motor drivers, etc., all these people should have been contacted to be able to understand the impact. And consumer societies, all these people need to be contacted to see the impact on all sectors of society. Honorable Speaker, the key institution that can facilitate the success of the fight is the Minister of Finance. And page 6 of the report tells us what the ministry has actually been doing. At page 6, the Minister of Finance revealed that 500 million pledged to the Minister of Health, 172 million had already been paid, that 100 million out of the 172 was added to the grant approved by the World Bank towards the procurement of ambulance and so on and so forth, all equivalent to 12 billion. So essentially, it is important to see exactly the resource base of COVID-19. And we hope that ultimately we will put all the resources together. First and foremost, we've heard from the Health Committee indicating the special fund that is created. We need to look at this issue of special funds. We have also seen your report, especially the addendum, and it is very clear. For me, that was my major concern, and we thank the committee that that element is now very clear. We are only told that there is environment, but how did they get the 500 million? And what is clear from what they have received, the memo they received, the committee received from the ministry, is that the Office of the President had environment on travel of 20 million. PMO training, 70 million. National Audit Office, travel, 16 million. Minister of Health, 50 million on consultancy. Centralized services, that is 150 million. Minister of Environment, OMVG, 100 million. OVP, about 2 million. So the National Assembly, PMO, 1 million. National Assembly, 4 million, that is travel. Judiciary, 2 million. PSC, 1 million. Tourism, 1 million. Justice, 1 million. Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, 2 million. We have agriculture, 2 million. Trade, 1 million. Health, 2 million. Environment, 1 million. MOSI, 500,000. Fisheries, 1.5 million. Mohas, 1 million. Moxwell, 500,000. Health, 70 million. So in essence, that is 500 million. So we are being told that that's where the environment actually comes. And let's look at Section 29 of the Public Finance Act in terms of environment to see whether what has happened is actually the right thing that should happen and what lessons could we draw from it. Section 29 provides 3 foundations, 3 pillars for environment. Subsection 2, Section 4 states that there can be environment among expenditure items of a budgetary agency, which means you have a budgetary agency, a ministry, National Assembly, these are all budgetary agencies. So you can have a environment of items of budget within a budgetary agency, so it goes from one to the other. Or among budgetary agencies under the same supervising department, you have a department, 3 departments under a ministry. Well, it's the same budgetary agency, so you can have environment between the funds of those departments. But among budgetary agencies, by the approval of the minister, in consultation with the vote controller of budget agencies. So what has actually happened here is environment across budgetary agencies. And if the minister had consulted with the board controllers, it is perfectly in order. But if the minister has not done that, then the minister should accept that there has been oversight, and then this assembly should be assured that as long as the Public Finance Act exists, that will be respected, from henceforth. But essentially, we must look at what has also been said by the Ministry of Finance. They've indicated that in terms of the funds that they have received from the World Bank, that is actually given to the central, and that when it's given to the central bank, then in reality, the central bank will actually lend to the ministry, and in that sense, they have no authority to control what the central bank does. That is how it is put here. I would like the minister eventually to really explain the rapid credit facility there must have been some form of agreement between the IMF and the government, whether it was 20th century, 19th century, 18th century, but there must have been an agreement. And it is only the existence of that agreement, that parent agreement, that should be able to ensure such development in terms of funds going into an account and being utilized without coming to the National Assembly. So we would the minister to search for that parent agreement so that we ultimately know from which provision that this particular practice is emerging from. Without that, then we have to sit down and really look at the practice and then make sure that the practice is fit for purpose. That is the purpose of the exercise, Honorable Speaker, that we are here to look at COVID-19 from the perspective of the national interest. As it stands, our committee has made recommendations, and I will propose that we take this report, not as the final report, if the committee chairs and members agree, but as a preliminary report, which should be beefed up by debriefing of all the elements that are here, so that a seasoned recommendation, a robust recommendation could be made that will come in the form of a resolution that the National Assembly will adopt. This is important that we now have the facts. What is important now is to rely on the facts to ensure that we build the mechanism that will be able to fight the fight so that we can be victorious at the end. And I hope the ministry will see, especially health, will see the vacuum in building up that institutional framework for the fight. I have not seen any layer of bringing the experts in the country and mobilizing them so that we build up an observatory for disease control on a permanent basis. There should be an objective of having a permanent observatory for disease control, which will definitely be guided and directed by a team of experts who will facilitate the building of the institution itself and then train the Gambians who will be able to run the institution. That is really important at this stage. I have also not seen that whole plan of ensuring that testing throughout the country is done with immediacy. There are plans, but we want something concrete and time-bound so that we see that this is exactly what is going to happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. So don't come to us this time and ask for extension of state of emergency without concretely saying, this is what we can achieve. And this is what we want to achieve concretely. And this is what is going to be visible. So in that sense, we'll be able to move forward. If they have that, then we should be able to give them 45, whatever number of days. But if they don't have that, you may end up with 25 days, you may end up with, because still we need to check whether you are fit for purpose, whether you are ready to fight this fight and lead us to fight it. We must be convinced. And the regulations also must now be built up on the basis of consultation so that we do not offend sensibilities. It is said that the regulations must be reasonable and justifiable in a democratic society. And lastly, Honorable Speaker, there is an extension mandate of other elements that should be taken into consideration. If you look at Section 36 of the Constitution, it also goes to protect those people who may be arrested and detained under a state of emergency, and make it a requirement to report to the National Assembly on those who are detained during a state of public emergency. So we hope that the minister will go into whole issue of protection of fundamental rights and checking whether there is need for those tribunals to be established, because it demands tribunal to be established to look at certain cases which deals with emergency powers, because emergency powers are not ordinary powers. They are dealing with other issues. So do you need to create that special tribunal? So it is important that we look at this with greater insight, and hopefully we'll be able to create the machinery to be able to advance the cause of fighting COVID-19 and exterminate it before it exterminates us. Thank you.